My name's Megan Riakos and I'm the writer, director, producer of the feature film Crushed. I first discovered filmmaking when I was 16 in my media studies class at school, and up until then I'd been, a lot into drama and theatre and that kind of stuff. And once I did the media studies class and we had to make our own short film, I was like, this is what I really love. And so I worked towards getting into the Bachelor of Arts Media Communication at UTS. Did that for 3 years, then moved over to the States and worked on independent films over there. So I worked on about 6 or 7 indie films, starting real low as a production assistant and working my way up to assistant directing and a little bit of art department, stuff like that. Then moved back to Australia and continued that on, still making my own short films and writing my own scripts. And then finally in 2010, I got into a full-time directing course at AFTRS. After that year, I did a screenwriting course at UCLA doing the professional screenwriters program. So once I had done all of that, I was gearing up. Doing those things was gearing up to make my first feature. And to begin with, I thought, I'll go the regular route like everyone else does. Go to AFTRS and then apply for funding and then you'll get it. And I understood fairly quickly that there was going to be a much longer process if I were to go that way and not guaranteed at all. So I decided that I was going to forge forward and came up with Crushed as a budget of a film that I knew I could achieve. So the UCLA Screenwriters program that I was accepted into, within that course it's 1 year part-time and you create 2 feature scripts from the very first idea right through to the end of the first draft. So it's really quite quick to get two features, 2 completed drafts of 2 features. And doing that course was all about trying to find that elusive lower budget idea that I knew I could achieve. And up until that point, I'd written about 5 features and they were all really big budget. And I was like, I need to just, give myself some constraints. So I started that course with the idea of writing something that I was going to shoot. And the first script I wrote was, again, too big a budget. The second script I wrote, I really thought, okay, I've got to knuckle down on this. And a couple of weeks before I had to pitch, basically the idea was you had to pitch 3 ideas at your first class and kind of gauge the audience, your classmates' reactions, and then choose one of those and you go forward really quickly. And I just watched Jane Campion's Top of the Lake. There was a special screening at the Orpheum where Jane presented the first 2 episodes on the big screen, which was really cool. And just hearing her speak was really inspiring. She seemed really positive about, forging forward in this genre and also in TV, which obviously mine's not TV, but she, some of the inspiration that she was talking about were things that I had seen and responded to in the past. And one of those things was The Staircase, this amazing documentary about this writer who lives in the Midwest, whose wife fell down a set of stairs and died, and he was accused of her murder. And it's an amazing documentary where, he had a couple of kids from a previous marriage, she had a couple of kids from a previous marriage. And to begin with, everyone thinks he's innocent. And as the documentary progresses, half the kids think he did it and half the kids don't. And I thought, man, imagine that, something happens to one of your parents and you think they're innocent and then you find out all these secrets. And that was kind of the genesis for Crush, this idea that these people who you think you know so well can have these secrets. And, I don't know if this guy did it. I know he shouldn't have been convicted, but I think it's all about how much do you really know the people you think you know? And so that was the first kernel for Crushed. And then I decided that I needed to give myself a few more restrictions to make sure that the script still kept into that lower budget range. And so I started thinking about interesting locations to have this kind of thriller film. And I remembered that about 6 or 7 years ago, I'd gone on a girls' weekend with a bunch of my school friends out to Mudgee. One of my friend's family owned a vineyard out there. And so we stayed in their old rundown workers' cottage and I thought, this is an amazing place to shoot a film. Maybe a romantic comedy or something like that. And so I remembered the vineyard and I thought that would be an amazing place for a mystery thriller because you don't see, you rarely get to see vineyards in that darker way. So I sent an email to my friend and said, do you think your dad might be keen to let us come shoot a film? And they welcomed us with open arms. I think with the films that I make, the number one thing that I think the films that I make, the thing that I'm really interested in is human behavior and why people behave the way they do. And I'm really interested in that grey area, in ethics and morals and that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not really interested in black or white. I'm interested in people who have flaws and make mistakes, and really lovely people can do really terrible things and vice versa. And I think that this kind of genre is ripe to explore those kinds of personalities. Because I did this within the structure of the UCLA course, it was really quick. So I conceived of the idea 2 weeks before class started, and then pitched it pretty much, well, it was pretty much April Fool's Day. So April Fool's Day 2013, and then that particular subject went for 10 weeks. So I had to deliver a first completed draft within 10 weeks. So conception to delivery was 10 weeks for that first draft. And I knew that there were a lot of things, because when you're working at that speed, there's a lot of things you don't have time to figure out. But so for things like the motive behind the killer, I had chosen something that was a lot more typical of a mystery thriller, and I always knew I was going to change the motive. I was like, okay, this is about banging out the first draft, understanding the world that we're living in. These things aren't going to be perfect, but with the time I was given for this course, it was just something that I knew I had to bang out. And I've worked a little bit differently on my other scripts, but this was really great. You get so much progress, and every week you had to hand in a certain number of pages. So there was this external deadline that I had, which is why I had taken the course to begin with. And then what happened was, after that 10 weeks, I basically did another 5 or 6 drafts over the next 8 months before we started shooting. So, and in those drafts, I went back through and I really thought about exactly how I could make a more unique version of the film I had come up with, change the title, you know. But what was really great is I had this really strong blueprint. You know, I had the plot points in place, and now I could work harder on creating stronger characters and a more unique storyline. Well, I was really lucky to work with a DOP called Michael Steele, and we studied at AFTRS together back in 2010 and have shot 3 short films together. So we had a really good rapport and a really good shorthand. So for me, the speed that we were shooting this film at and the kind of real truncated pre-production period meant that because we had that shorthand, we were able to get this done. And in a way that I'm really proud of. If it was a different DOP that I didn't have a relationship with, it would have been a really tough shoot. Our pre-production process was really quite short. We didn't have time to shortlist the whole film before we started the film. We shortlisted the first 4 days before we started shooting. We did talk a lot about the style that we wanted. We did talk about how we wanted to cover in general rather than specifics. And obviously, you know, looking a lot of references and things like that. But with the speed that we were shooting at and the fact that we were shooting in Mudgee, so we didn't have access to the locations to really sit down and do 2 weeks of nutting out exactly what angles. And I'm also a big believer, the way that I work with my actors is I don't try to demand that they block in a very specific way. Like obviously I need them to do certain things in a scene, but I also want them to feel free to find comfort in the way that the scene is structured and make the place their own, I guess. And if you do that, well, then it's a bit difficult to do really stringent shot list. So, you know, if I had the opportunity to have more time in pre, absolutely it would have been amazing. But having that shorthand with Michael Steele meant that I could totally entrust him. You know, when the going got tough and we were working at, you know, ridiculously high speeds, I knew that I could, you know, give him my idea of what I was after and he would work out the details. The biggest thing that I do with my actors is try and have a conversation with them beforehand. So rehearsals is great if you've got the time and the actors have the time. But even if you don't have time for rehearsals, it's having proper chats. Like, you know, one of my actresses lived over in LA and was only available to meet on the set. So we did a bunch of Skype calls and lots of emails, and different actors, you know, have different methods and different preparation techniques. But generally, what I'm interested in rehearsals is talking out exactly who these characters are, going through and working out motivation, and I'm really big on working with my actors and bringing on their ideas, because I really believe that to get the strongest performance possible, it's about letting them own their characters and you helping and guiding them to make sure it still fits into the vision of the film. When we decided to shoot at the vineyard location, and we got the approval from my friend's family, I went out there and, you know, my friend Sarah drove me around their property, and Mudgee, it's a really great place to shoot because it's got that small country town feel, but it's big enough to have all of the necessities that you need. Like, you know, there's Bunnings and there's, you know, Woolies. And so it's not like you're without, you know, those services, but you've got that really great small town vibe. So people are really keen to help out and they're really laid back. And, you know, I was very, I thought it was really important to write the locations that I knew we could get into the script. So I wrote the script thinking, oh, okay, these are the normal things that you would have at a vineyard or at a winery. And then I went out and did a location recce and realised that, you know, a lot of vineyards in Australia can't just survive off the goods of the, you know, the product of their wine. They often have a lot of other kinds of businesses. So for instance, the Cox family out there, you know, they have sheep, they have cattle, they have wheat. So there was all these different locations on their one property, which was amazing. So we just drove around and was like, we can make that so-and-so's farm. We can make this where she has to run through and she's escaping. And so it was really, really exciting because normally, you know, a film that, you know, hasn't got a big budget, you're really trying to close in the number of locations that you use and you're often confined and constricted. And in this, I feel like that Crushed feels quite big and the scope is quite big because we're outdoors a lot of the time and we're in these different locations. And so it was really, I feel really grateful that we had access not only to the vineyard but to all of the other, you know, extra parts of the property. So I think when you're working on a feature, it doesn't matter how big a budget it is. I think there's some really tough challenges when it comes to the amount of time you've got to shoot and the amount of money you've got to shoot with. And we were very strong on not shooting ridiculously long days. You know, we really did try to, as much as possible, stick to the 10-hour days. But we were shooting like 35 setups a day, I think. That was like our average, which, you know, for those of you who haven't worked on independent films or Australian footage films in general, you're probably more likely to be shooting 20 setups. So we were almost double. So we were shooting at such a great speed. But I think some of the challenges were, there's some action sequences, you know, it's a mystery thriller. So, you know, people get chased and running and ducking and shooting and things like that. And when you don't have a whole lot of time to shoot those sequences, then you have to get really creative. So, you know, the film is, you know, the last 15 minutes of the film is chase sequences through a vineyard at night. So as you can imagine, that presents a few tricky things that have to happen. And there's shooting and blood and knives and it got to the point where we're like, we don't have time to do massive amounts of coverage. And we've got these stunt sequences and people have to fall and fall safely. And the costumes that we had chosen, you know, because I hadn't really done stunt sequences before, the costumes I had chosen for some of the characters to wear didn't cover their elbows or knees, so you couldn't put padding on them. So it's just, you know, I really put the actors through their paces. And those were the days, they were the final 2 days of the shoot, and those were our longest shooting days because we really had, you know, this is the final sequences of the film. You had to get the film emotionally right, you had to get the film technically right, and we did have to go back and schedule in another half-day shoot in order to get that stuff that we didn't plan. So that was hard work and tough, and it's 3 in the morning and everyone is worked to the bone, but we're all working for the same common goal, and I guess that's what's really important about crewing up and finding the right people. So my editor Anil Griffin and I have worked together since Afters as well. I mean, the best thing for me about Afters was the team that I got from it. So pretty much all of my heads of department were people I studied with. So Anil Griffin and I had cut we've worked on 2 shorts together, and this is both his first feature and my first feature. So I guess when you're shooting a short, you know, in some ways a short is just a short version of a feature, but a feature is a massive beast. You know, the longest film I had made before Crush was 21 minutes, and this one is now 111 minutes. I mean, it's a big difference. And how do you approach that amount of data and that amount of rushes and that arc? And so we were navigating that together, but I was really lucky that Anil was available to come out to Mudgee along with his assistant editor Kieran. They were able to come out to Mudgee, so they were logging the rushes and doing an assembly while we were shooting. So it meant that he was able to alert me to anything that we were missing. And then once we got back to Sydney, I gave him about 3 weeks to do an assembly. So he went through, and obviously my choice of takes was written down in the continuity notes and things like that. But I was happy to just let him go and put together the film the way that he felt it was working. And it also gave me some distance to just let the film settle, having lived with it and breathed it for so long, you know. And at that point we were on to organising our Kickstarter campaign, which is totally time consuming. So it was not a bad thing that, you know, that Anil was off putting together an assembly. And then once the assembly was put together, I worked very closely with Anil. So I am somebody that likes to be very involved in the edit process. But having said that, I'm also very open to suggestions from the editor. You know, I love to edit, but I'm not an official editor. And I think the thing is, with all of your head departments, you need to respect their talent and their experience. Otherwise, it's not a true collaboration. And I think, you know, that's what filmmaking's about. So yeah, so really after that first assembly, I was in there for the majority of the time, but there would be moments where he was like, oh, look, well, we knew a scene wasn't particularly working, and it was tough going. So I would let him, you know, have a bit of time where he might come up with 3 different versions, and he would just be able to have a bit of fun with it. And then I'd come back in and be a little bit more objective about those 3 versions. So we did do a little bit of that, but most of the time I was heavily involved with the edit. The film it was privately financed to begin with. So we knew that we were a bunch of unknowns, and we knew that it was going to be difficult to crowdfund before we started shooting. So we gathered up money that we'd saved ourselves, and money that we had managed to get from friends and family or contacts that we knew would be keen in supporting film. And so with a very tiny budget, we went out and shot the film. And what we also did is we invited our cast and crew to become a part of the profits of the film. So we were able to pay all of our cast and crew, but we also gave them a percentage. So we couldn't pay their full rate, so that kind of supplemented it. And then once we had gotten into post, we knew very quickly that we needed more money. So we did the Kickstarter campaign. So that was in March in 2014, and we raised just over 36 grand, which was great. And I'd never done a Kickstarter campaign before, but I really appreciate the marketing and the audience building kind of sides of it that I'd never really kind of acknowledged before. And I would say to any other filmmaker who's planning on going out and making a film on their own to seriously consider it, but also think about at what point you want to do it. Because if I had done that Kickstarter campaign at the beginning of my, before we had shot, I don't think we would have raised that money. Just, you know, before the film started, it was me and 2 other people. By the time we had gotten into post, I had a crew of 30, a cast of 12, you know, everyone else all of their network who were able to, also we could tap into as an audience members and as people who want to help the film. So, yeah, and then, yeah, it was just really kind of building up a little bit more money after that as well. So we'll be working with FanForce to release the film theatrically throughout Australia. But before that happens, we think it's really important to try and get as much out of a film festival release throughout the world, because that will help us getting our audiences in Australia once it comes time to do the public release. So at the end of this month, we're really excited about our world premiere. We'll be premiering at the Montreal World Film Festival at the end of August. And then Napa Valley Film Festival, which obviously is a really good tie-in with wine. And there's a couple other film festivals that are cropping up, but they haven't been totally locked in yet, so we can't announce. But what's really great is being able to get that film out there in the film festival kind of world, and tap into those networks as well. And then hopefully off the back of that, getting into the public release early next year. We're still figuring out whether or not we want to do a day and date release with our online video, that kind of stuff. So I'm still in talks with a few people about that, so nothing's confirmed yet. But I am hopeful that we are able to reach a really good amount of the audience in Australia, and I'm confident that we'll make this film profitable. What's next from here for me? I would say that, you know, Crushed, because I'm producing this film as well, has taken up a lot of my time and will take up a lot of my time probably for the next 6 months. But I've been working on a couple of other scripts that have been around for a few years. They're, like I had mentioned earlier, a bit of a bigger budget, so they couldn't have been my first films. But I'm hoping that once I head over to these film festivals and I've got a slate of scripts and ideas ready to go, that I can start pitching myself as a director and find a bigger production company to team up with to make my next film. There will be a next one, there's no doubt. It's just going to be where, how, why, which script. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.